It's nearly time for the holidays, so you know what that means. A lot of eating and probably not a lot of exercise, followed by New Year's resolutions to work off those Christmas pudding pounds. Well, here's one thing that might help with that. This video's sponsor, MacroFactor. MacroFactor is an app that helps you reach your wellness and nutrition goals. The core of it is a food tracker that lets you record what you're eating so you can see how many calories, carbs, proteins, and other nutritional elements you're consuming. There's so many ways to quickly add what you're eating, like lists that automatically populate your most regularly used entries, or the ability to just scan a barcode like I did with this can of tuna. I actually committed myself to using MacroFactor almost every day from October onwards, and in that time I've actually lost 2.5 kilos. But the thing is, I actually haven't been dieting, right? I've just not been eating as much junk because MacroFactor is there to help me track what I'm eating and make better decisions and see how many calories are in the things that I'm eating. So it's just stopped me from making lots of bad decisions. And as a result, even though I'm not dieting, I'm losing weight. It also has integrations with Apple and Fitbit devices so you can track daily steps too. And their check-in feature will help you adjust your daily calorie intake target so you're always on track to hit your goals. So get a head start on your New Year's resolutions now. Click the link below or search MacroFactor on the app or Google Play stores. Be sure to use offer code SKILLUP when signing up to get 14 days for free. That's offer code SKILLUP for 14 free days. Thanks to MacroFactor for sponsoring the video, and now let's get to it. Gamers, hello and welcome to the last official This Week in Video Games for 2025. Next week, we'll do our annual This Year in Video Games wrap-up, where we take a look back at the biggest news, events, and releases that define 2025, with a little pop culture thrown in for good measure. I promise I will not make any 6-7 jokes, for we are all too old for that shit. This one was meant to be a quiet one since the Game Awards are done and the industry is basically already on holiday. But then Bungie announced a release window for Marathon, and that's kind of a big deal. And then Larian boss Sven Vincke took an interview with Jason Schreier of Bloomberg, and I'm willing to bet big money he wished he hadn't, because after just unveiling his big follow-up to Baldur's Gate 3, the discourse has not been kind to him following his comments on generative AI. Kind of ironic, since I bet he's feeling a lot like that dude in The Wicker Man right now. Anyway, we should probably explain what the hell is going on, so let's get to the news. Let's cover some of the non-AI related Larian stuff first, I think. Larian's next game is called Divinity, and it was revealed at the Game Awards in a very provocative trailer. In an extensive interview with Bloomberg, Larian's CEO and creative director Sven Vincke had some vague but exciting details to share about it, saying, quote, "This is going to be us unleashed, I think. It's a turn-based RPG featuring everything you've seen from us in the past, but it's brought up to the next level. The idea is that when you talk to fellow journalists about the game, you'll have completely different stories. We're doing a couple of things that you haven't seen in RPGs before, I think. Baldur's Gate 3 was a good game, and I'm proud of it, but I think this one is going to be way better," end quote. Man, I think you have to be pretty damn confident in what you're making to assert that it will be better than one of the greatest video games ever made. So for Vincke to put that out there, the team must be onto a very good thing. Interestingly, Larian was actually working on a D&D game for Wizards of the Coast before abandoning that project and pivoting to Divinity. Quote, "Conceptually, all of the ingredients for a really cool game were there, except for the hearts of the developers," end quote. He then goes on to note how D&D projects can be difficult to translate from tabletop to digital gaming, and that with Divinity, they're, quote, "making a system that's made for a video game, it's much easier to understand," end quote. When speaking about development timelines, Bloomberg says, quote, "Larian is trying to find ways to cut down on development time and aims to finish Divinity in less time than Baldur's Gate 3, which took 6 years to make because of its scale and COVID-19 disruptions," end quote. With Vincke himself saying, quote, 3 to 4 years is much healthier than 6 years, end quote. Thankfully, he does go on to clarify that they aren't rushing things. Quote, "The creative process itself actually is something you cannot accelerate. People underestimate how many times we're implementing something and realize in the middle that it's just not going to work," end quote. And this was the part of the interview where Vincke goes from being industry darling to being man burned in effigy. Try asked him about generative AI, because Vincke has in the past said that Larian are using AI in certain parts of the game development pipeline, mainly for what he called grunt work or jobs nobody wanted to do. But he went further here, claiming that generative AI was being used as part of the concept art creation process. Here's what Schreier wrote, quote, "Under Vincke, Larian has been pushing hard on generative AI, although the CEO says the technology hasn't led to big gains in efficiency. He says there won't be any AI-generated content in Divinity. Everything is human actors. We're writing everything ourselves, but the creators often use AI tools to explore ideas, flesh out PowerPoint presentations, develop concept art, and write placeholder text," end quote. Schreier then goes on to say that the usage of Gen-AI has led to some pushback at Larian, but that Vincke says, quote, "I think at this point, everyone at the company is more or less okay with the way we're using it," end quote. So that set off an absolute firestorm online, with social media lighting up with outrage that Larian were using AI in the creative process, with some very exaggerated claims like Divinity will be nothing more than AI slop, as well as more substantive criticisms where people point to the many issues associated with generative AI, be they creative, ethical, or environmental. The backlash was so severe that Vincke issued a statement on Twitter and I'm not sure I would have gone with this opening. Quote, "Holy fuck, guys, we're not pushing hard for or replacing concept artists with AI. We have a team of 72 artists, of which 23 are concept artists, and we are hiring more. The art they create is original, and I'm very proud of what they do. I was asked explicitly about concept art and our use of Gen-AI. I answered that we use it to explore things. I didn't say we use it to develop concept art. Artists do that, and they are indeed world-class artists. We use AI tools to explore references, just like we use Google and art books. At the very early ideation stages, we use it as a rough outline for composition, which we replace with original concept art. There is no comparison. We've hired creators for their talent, not for their ability to do what a machine suggests, but they can experiment with these tools to make their lives easier," end quote. It appears as though Vinke was taking exception to Schreier's characterization that Larian was pushing hard for generative AI use at the studio. In a post on Blue Sky, Schreier said, quote, "If I had known that the 2 paragraphs about Gen AI in my article today would be so controversial, I would have expanded them a bit," end quote. He then provided a portion of his interview transcript where Vinke provides a more nuanced take. For example, he says their experimentation with AI hasn't yielded great results, and they're not seeing big efficiency gains. And that's hardly the sort of thing a leader would say if they were forcefully ramming AI down the throat of their workers. He clarifies that Larian actually bought a boutique art firm recently at a time when studios are hiring less artists, and he says that they're still actively hiring concept artists. The overall tone of this exchange is not of a CEO who's proselytizing AI as the foregone future of the creative arts. It's a guy being transparent about the ways that Larian is testing this technology, and he's not very impressed with the results he's seeing, but he wants to try it because it's new technology, and this is, at least in part, a technology-led industry. And I interpret this exchange this way because the truth is, I think someone like Sven Vinke deserves a little grace in this moment. This is a guy who has worked his entire career to make incredible player-centered games, games that respect our intelligence, games that advance our medium, games that are free of all the anti-consumer bullshit that has ruined so much of the industry. This is a person who has devoted their life to the purest form of this art form. And I've seen so many dunks and so much commentary that just completely ignores all of that because he said something that they don't agree with about AI. I don't agree with his AI take personally, and I will talk about why in a moment, but I do think he deserves a little more grace than what many corners of the internet are currently affording him. I think he's earned at least that. And connected to that, there's also the risk that these sorts of discussions around AI limit our ability to have proper, informed discussions about this technology and how it affects game making, because I'll be honest, I think a lot of the current discourse around AI is not specific enough and it's ill-informed. Like, did you know that a recent survey says that 50% of Japanese studios are utilizing AI in some way? A Unity survey says that 62% of studios are using AI, and a Google survey says that that number is as high as 92%. Hideo Kojima recently came out and said that AI is a friend that can be used to do tedious work so that they can then focus on creativity. But is it fair to call programming and QA tedious work and hand wave it as being okay to replace with AI, while a texture artist job is sacrosanct? Todd Howard has recently said that he views AI as a tool, but that human creativity must be protected. He likened AI to Photoshop, implying it's a tool set that automates tasks previously done by actual people. In fact, he went further and said something almost identical to the stuff that got Vinke into so much trouble. Quote, "But I think we look at it as a tool for, is there a way we can use it to help us go through some iterations that we do ourselves faster? Not in generating things, we are always working on our tool set for how we build our worlds or check things," end quote. So my point with all of this is not to be like, just surrender to the slop. My point is, a huge portion of game development is already using AI tools in some way or another, and that's just a fact. And it's not all just soulless executives forcing their staff to adopt it, like Microsoft trying to cram Copilot down our throats whenever we boot up Windows. It's finding use cases that make sense in various processes and contexts, and developers are adapting the tools that work for them and ignoring the ones that don't. I personally have seen so many reactionary takes to AI that I'm actually quite checked out from the popular discourse around it at the moment. I don't think it's helpful. At this point, I only want to hear from actual game makers who have informed opinions about this stuff, and that's why I was very excited to see that our website's managing editor, Edmund Tran, spoke to over a dozen actual concept artists, people who work as independent contractors or for indie studios or for AA studios, and even some who work for massive AAA studios. He spoke to them about what a concept artist actually does and how Gen AI actually impacts their workflow. Do you know what every single one of them said? They said that Gen AI doesn't help them, and in fact, it makes their job harder. Artists he spoke to explained that concepting is a process driven by imagination and rigor, and that starting with generative AI inputs, even if they are used as inspiration, the way you might use a mood board or something else, it corrupts the process, limiting imagination. Other concept artists explained that they're now regularly facing situations where non-artists are using Gen AI to produce concept art that isn't good, but it's lodged in their boss's or their client's mind as a starting point, and that starting point may not actually be tied to the rest of the game's visual identity or world building. There's also the risk of accidental plagiarism, as Gen AI inputs often need to be reverse engineered so you aren't accidentally stealing someone's distinctive design or style. And then there's the flow-on impacts when it comes to artist discovery or training the next generation of artists, some of whom won't get the chance to work in this space because senior managers feel like they can rely on a generative machine rather than an actual person. I'll leave a link to the full article below the like button, but it's this stuff that I listen to. Actual game makers explaining in clear terms why this is bad, drawing on their own specific lived experience, and providing very clear examples of times when Gen AI has made their lives harder, not easier. It's this stuff that leads me to conclude that Vinke is probably wrong here, but even then, there's layers of nuance that we shouldn't lose sight of. It doesn't sound like Vinke was trying to ram AI adoption down the throats of his artists. It sounds like he and his team were trying things. At no point is he firing artists so he could rely on AI. To the contrary, they bought an art firm and they're hiring more artists. So maybe Vinke has the wrong end of the stick here, but is Larian washed? Is Divinity an AI slop game? Is Vinke a greedy, soulless, anti-creative executive ghoul looking to outsource creativity and vampirically suck profit from the plagiarism machine? I don't think so, man. Let's just take a beat and give Vinke some frank feedback without, going full Wicker Man on him. By the way, that report from Ed is really great stuff, and it's the sort of thing we regularly do on the website thisweekinvideogames.com. We got another feature up there from our reporter Maddie Agnew, where she spoke to the Horses developers about the impact of getting banned on Steam and how they feel that the ban is actually rooted in American values. There's also a piece from industry analyst Simon Carlos about the relationship between game sales and average playtime, while Stu just reviewed the interesting survival horror puzzler Routine, and Patrick just previewed Quantic Dream's upcoming hero shooter Spellcaster Chronicles. This is just a taste of how much you'll find over on the site. All of it is 100% ad-free and reader-funded, so do consider signing up as a supporter if you haven't, because that support literally funds all of this truly independent coverage. I'll leave a link to This Week in Video Games below the like button. Speaking of problems with your art, Marathon. After underwhelming previews, a public beta met with similar disappointment and a scandalous situation concerning the plagiarism of some of its art, which has now been settled by the way, Bungie returned to the fray this week with a Vidoc showing off the new and improved Marathon. In a post to their website summarizing the changes, they say, quote, "Since the alpha test in April, we've been quietly iterating on Marathon alongside a dedicated community of players. Every closed playtest was a chance for us to hear candid feedback about what's working, what needs work, and where Marathon can shine," end quote. And you know what? It seems like Marathon might be getting on the right track, at least according to the feedback to that Vidoc. The YouTube comments are filled with praise for the game's visual uplift, which looked far more grungy and atmospheric than when the game first made its public appearance, much more in line with that sick-looking cinematic trailer. They also added much-requested features like proximity chat, solo queue, and their own take on Arc Raiders' free loadout system, as well as major world events that can spring up during matches. Loot has also seen improvements with weapon mods that can radically improve a weapon's function. Examples shown here include an SMG that could basically be turned into a needler, and a pistol that gained a suppressor and the ability to turn you invisible on kill. Not bad at all. One of the more novel additions for my money is that player corpses now linger on the ground and actually decay over time, allowing you to get a sense of the time of death and assess where the potential threats might still be around. A really clever and fitting mechanic for the genre, I think. Bungie also spoke about how factions each have a distinct identity in the quests and rewards they give you. There's a codex that'll store audio logs and other lore tidbits, and something that really caught my interest was mention of the endgame map set on the Marathon ship. This will have teams enter with their best gear to work through a number of vaults, each of them getting increasingly more dangerous, all with the promise of being rewarded with the best loot and the biggest lore reveals. So all of this is looking better. Still far too early to say if it'll be enough for Marathon to deliver to Sony's likely very high expectations, but it's definitely on the right track after a very rocky reveal and those initial playtests. What's more, Bungie locked in the release window that Sony had earlier hinted at during their earnings call. Marathon will launch in March of next year, though no specific date has been provided yet, and it will retail for $40, a price point that was well and truly proved out by Arc Raiders when it launched a little while ago and sold a bajillion copies. Will Marathon follow in Arc Raiders' footsteps, riding its coattails into an enlarged player pool hungry for more sci-fi extraction experiences, or will it struggle under the shadow of an established competitor, one who will likely pull out all the stops in March to keep players logged into Arc Raiders for as long as possible. Who knows, but I'll tell you what, it's been a long time since we've had a brand spanking new Bungie game to play, and I for one am looking forward to that March release window because I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but I quite enjoyed Destiny. Maybe I'll make a video about it one day, I don't know. Some lightning round items now, and Brian Fleming, studio head of Sucker Punch, has left the company. Sony Interactive made the announcement yesterday saying, quote, after nearly 3 decades helping bring to life iconic franchises like Sly Cooper, Infamous, Ghost of Tsushima, and Ghost of Yotei, Brian Fleming has announced he's passing Sucker Punch studio leadership onto a new generation. Starting January 1, longtime creative and technical lead Jason Connell and Adrian Bentley will step into new roles as studio heads, continuing to guide the team's focus on ambitious, character-driven experiences that define PlayStation Studios, end quote. Connell was co-creative director on the Ghost franchise, while Bentley was technical director working on tools and systems, and alongside them, Nate Fox continues his role as co-creative director. Hopefully, they're already hard at work on that Sly Raccoon reboot that everyone keeps begging for. Another key departure that we missed last week due to the Game Awards staff was that Tekken boss Katsuhiro Harada is leaving Bandai Namco after some 30 years with the company. Taking to Twitter, he said, quote, with the Tekken series reaching its 30th anniversary, an important milestone for a project I've devoted much of my life to, I felt this was the most fitting moment to bring one chapter to a close. In recent years, I experienced the loss of several close friends in my personal life, and in my professional life, I witnessed the retirement or passing of many senior colleagues whom I deeply respect. Those accumulated events made me reflect on the time I have left as a creator, end quote. It'll be sad to see him go. Harada joined the company in the early 90s as a promoter before being given a position on the first Tekken game, and has been involved with every mainline release in the franchise since, acting as director for Tekken 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8, eventually landing himself as general manager and global marketing manager at Bandai Namco in 2016. Doesn't appear as if he'll be retiring though, as he says he'll share his next move at a later date. Bandai Namco released a statement assuring players that the company remains, quote, fully committed to the future development and content plans for Tekken 8. We will continue to take community feedback on the game and its content to heart to ensure that we uphold the vision and spirit built by Harada-san, end quote. In a sort of opposite note, Obsidian Entertainment welcomes the return of Tim Kaine after leaving the company 9 years ago. He's an industry veteran known for creating the Fallout series and worked as director on The Outer Worlds 1. He announced the news on his own YouTube channel, which I do recommend you check out for his candid insights on RPGs and game development. He said, quote, should point out that I'm back at Obsidian. I'm their full-time employee and in person, so not remote, so I'm not a contractor anymore, end quote. He says he obviously can't talk about what he's working on due to NDA, but interestingly he says, quote, don't bother guessing, you're not gonna guess, end quote. So I think it's unlikely that it's like the next Outer Worlds game, nor a new Pillars of Eternity game, since he previously worked on that as well. Maybe they got a brand new IP cooking? One of the more surprising news stories this week, Ubisoft has acquired the rights to March of the Giants and its development team at Amazon Games' Montreal Studios. This is an upcoming free-to-play MOBA with RTS elements, and it's sort of like a World War I meets steampunk aesthetic. Honestly, totally blanked on what this was until I looked up the trailer. Lack of buzz for this one does make this acquisition seem a little unusual, but it also kind of makes sense since this comes as Amazon is looking to make significant cuts in its game development efforts, and looking for a buyer for their in-development projects is sure to be more profitable for them than just canning them entirely. It's also somewhat of a coming home for Ubisoft, since the creative director of March of the Giants is Xavier Marquis, who was previously the creative director on Rainbow Six Siege before leaving for Amazon in 2020. Also on the team is Alexandra Parazau, who previously acted as managing director for Ubisoft Toronto before leaving in 2021 to become a studio head at Amazon Games. In a post to their website, Ubisoft says the team will become part of a future creative house. You might recall that earlier this year, Ubisoft announced they'd be splitting their games division into separate creative houses, and this acquisition appears to fold into that grand plan. A brief update on the lawsuit surrounding Rockstar's recent sacking of 34 workers. IGN reached out for comment from Rockstar regarding a Discord channel that the company claims was used to share confidential information, to which they replied, quote, Discord channel in question included non-Rockstar employees such as a games journalist, an employee of a rival developer, and multiple anonymous members, and that staff who discussed union membership favorably but in its view did not breach confidentiality obligations were not dismissed, end quote, and that all of this was brought to their attention by current employees. International Workers of Great Britain Communications Officer Jake Thomas refuted these claims. IGN reports that he, quote, insisted that all members of the Discord were either union staff or officials or Rockstar employees, and once moderators found out about any members leaving the company, they were removed from the employee-only channel, end quote. He also denies that the firings were due to leaking game features for in-development projects, saying, quote, we're not entirely sure what game features from upcoming titles is referring to, and as far as I've seen, nothing that was discussed on the Discord lines up with that. All conversations were to do with working conditions, end quote. The court case on this is still pending, so we'll no doubt hear more soon. Less than a month after launch, Sakurai took to Twitter to announce that Kirby Air Riders is effectively content complete, and that the team behind it will soon disband. He says, quote, as discussed in Air Riders Direct 2, Kirby Air Riders does not have a production setup for DLC or anything like that. The team will be disbanding in the near future as well. Therefore, while we still have a short period of time to make adjustments, we're aiming for a balance that can be enjoyed without issues even years from now. We might be able to tweak it one more time or so, but after that, please enjoy it as the completed balance, end quote. Sakurai headed to work on the next Smash Brothers ? And finally, Dead Island fans, good news. According to developer Dan Buss's recent financial report, Dead Island 3 is confirmed to be in production. Quote, after release of Dead Island 2 Ultimate Edition in October 2024, the primary focus for Dan Buster Studios is now Dead Island 3. All developers are assigned to the project, and once the Luna and Mac version of Dead Island 2 are complete, all of the Dan Buster's QA team will be assigned to Dead Island 3. Parts of the game are now in early production with feature, character, world, and story design moving at pace, end quote. The report goes on to say the title is currently predicted to release in 2028. Fingers crossed it doesn't get stuck in game development hell like the last game did. Otherwise, we're looking at a release date closer to 2038. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, they shadow dropped a release date announcement, so it makes sense they would shadow drop an expansion announcement too. Earlier this week, Team Cherry dropped a new teaser trailer for Hollow Knight Silksong Sea of Sorrow, which will be a free expansion for the game slated for sometime in 2026. It'll feature new areas, bosses, and tools, and of course come with a nautical theme. They said to, quote, expect additional info shortly before Hollow Knight Silksong Sea of Sorrow release, end quote. And you can bet your butt that'll mean we get another sudden release date announcement from them. That's not all Team Cherry announced, however, they also revealed that the original Hollow Knight would be getting a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, which will give the game higher frame rates, higher resolutions, and more graphical effects along with some bug fixes. This will also be a free update as well, launching sometime in 2026, and the new features will also be coming to other platforms. In fact, the PC version already had some of them implemented on their public beta branches, including support for ultra-wide aspect. Very nice. And finally, sticking with Australian developers, Massive Monster, the studio behind Cult of the Lamb, announced a release date for what will be its first big paid DLC expansion. After about 10 or so that were free or just paid cosmetics, this one's coming out on January 26 next year, and it features new story content, dungeons, snow and ice themed weather effects, and animal breeding. But wait, aren't the characters animals already? Is Cult of the Lamb about to get a not safe for work tag on Steam? Cult of the Lamb just got a mobile release through Apple Arcade, by the way. And you know what else is getting a mobile release? Rainbow Six Siege, apparently, or at least a mobile specific version of it. Ubisoft announced this all the way back in 2022 and have been working on it since then with a few soft launch markets, but I guess it's ready now. It'll be out on February 23rd next year, and it'll be free to play, of course. Joining it in February is a mobile port for Tomb Raider, like the first reboot from 2013. Bit out of nowhere for this one, but hey, phones can certainly handle old school Tomb Raider graphics at this point. If Switch is more your bag for handheld gaming, then please don't miss Dispatch, which is getting its release on Switch 1 and 2 on January 28th. One of my favorite games for 2025, no question. Here's another popular one. Devolver's Quarantine Zone got a lot of buzz over its demo at the last Steam Next Fest, and they just announced a release date for January 12th for that one. We'll check back in on that one during our first show of 2026. And just one delay announcement this week, Terminator Survivors was the first-person open-world survival game based on the film franchise, and it's certainly a lot more ambitious than the retro demake that came out last week. Nacon originally had this slated for 2025, but given that there's only like 3 days left in the year, it's unlikely to hit that deadline. They pushed it out to 2026 for an unspecified date and said they're going to remove co-op from it, which is honestly a massive bummer. All right, so what came out last week? We'll go a bit further back and visit a few games which we missed out on last week. First up, Unbeatable. This rhythm action and narrative game was highly anticipated and had a very strong sense of style which caught everyone's eye. It ended up landing at a strong 76 on OpenCritic, and on Steam it has a very positive user score of 89%. Worth noting though that almost all the reviews acknowledge the fact that the story mode isn't completely coherent all of the time, but ultimately the game's heart and sharp rhythm gameplay make up for a lot of that. Here's a review on Steam from Winter Sound that gets to the heart of it. Quote, the story lacks cohesion, but it's drowning in emotion. The voice acting can be awkward, but it manages to sound more real than a lot of other games I've played. The characters feel like they get enough screen time for me to care about them, but little enough that I'm disappointed we don't see more of them. Game design screams ambition, but doesn't always feel like it reaches that potential, yet it never feels like the experience is less than what it could have been. What you're getting when you play Unbeatable is a team's full unfiltered vision with no compromises or dialbacks. It's a heavily imperfect and flawed experience, but isn't that what makes it human, end quote. Another rhythm action game which happened to shadow drop the same day as Unbeatable was Bits and Bops, which closed out the Wholesome Game Showcase. This was the Rhythm Heaven-like minigame collection, and it similarly landed at a very positive sentiment on Steam, with 94% of the reviews being positive. They all talk about the great art and animation, strong charm, and polished gameplay, with the major downside being that people really want a lot more of it. It's a short game at just 2 to 3 hours at most. Jack Schwack on Steam summed it up nicely, saying, quote, this hit a lot of the right points, neat, succinct, unique minigames, an awesome main menu and rhythm games. The music is great and the art is phenomenal, a nice bite-sized portion of rhythm minigames with sparkle brought by its creators, end quote. Similarly short and sweet is Terminator 2D No Face. Fate, which is that modern retro adaptation of Terminator 2 that was delayed a couple of times before finally coming out. By the sounds of things, this has very faithfully recreated the 1990s arcade game experience, not just in aesthetics, but in the fact that it only lasts for about the length of the movie, but that hasn't stopped critics from loving how well it adapts moments from the film. On OpenCritic, it sits at a strong 76, and on Steam, it's very positive 84%. Slant gave it 4 out of 5 stars, saying, quote, "Even without the Terminator license, this would still be a very well-executed old-school side-scrolling shooter. With the touchstones of the film to work with, though, Bitmap has delivered an experience that finally does proper justice to one of the greatest blockbuster films of all time," end quote. And yeah, look, any game that lets me play as naked Arnie beating up dudes in a bar gets my personal seal of approval. You know what else gets a seal of approval from Ed's kids? Bluey's quest for the gold pen. So that last Bluey game, not good, but this new one from the Fruit Ninja devs Halfbrick apparently does a much better job according to Ed. The story's got more of that Bluey narrative juice because the show's creator is more involved. The gameplay is more of an actual video game, kind of like a top-down 2D Zelda with exploration, collectibles, environmental puzzles, and unique stage mechanics. Hell, it's even got a Breath of the Wild style glider. On mobile, it goes back to the old premium purchase thing, and rather than having it be, free with ads or a subscription or whatever, Ed flags that there is a short free-to-try stage that's not really very indicative of how expansive the worlds can be, and if you've synced the gamepad, it's a really good way to get young kids to learn how to use a controller. This one's on mobile only right now, but it is headed to console sometime next year. Onto something a lot less heartwarming, Ashes of Creation. This is the MMO that's been in development for almost a decade and has been described as the Star Citizen of MMORPGs, a project that's been very well funded with a very successful Kickstarter and early founders packs, but apparently doesn't feel anywhere near finished. It's been running for a little while, but it got its Steam Early Access release last weekend, and yeah, it doesn't sound like it's anywhere near ready. The user reviews started off as mostly negative, but have climbed to a mixed rating, with 58% of them being positive. Here's one of the more helpful reviews by Steam user Dran, quote, "Almost 9 years later, this game is 20% ready, question mark. Quests last for like 5 hours, I'm generous here, and there's nothing to do outside of the pointless grind. Most core systems aren't working / aren't finished, PvP is forced, and of course, a fully functional cash shop is here. Simply put, Ashes of Creation is not good. Development is too slow. Soon we'll hit the 10-year mark and the game should have been ready for release years ago. Just do yourself a favor before dropping money on it and do a simple Google search. It should give you all the answers you need. Then you can decide for yourself if you want to invest in this dream," end quote. Yeah, look, this is generally good advice before you buy any video game. Don't be swayed by pre-orders and early access. Not for nothing, but Austin's playing through this one right now for review and he isn't loving it. Stay tuned for that review before the Christmas break. Alrighty, so what's coming out this week? Well, talking specifically about the next week, not so much, but given that this is our last proper show for the year, we'll expand the scope a little and look at everything coming out between now and the second week of January, and we'll be back the following week to pick things back up then. In fact, why don't we go backwards a little and start with Clover Pit, the roguelike slot machine game that got pushed because of Silksong, but sold 1 million copies anyway because man, do people like the sensation of playing a slot machine. The developer at Panic Arcade announced that they were bringing this one to iOS and Android last week, and it should already be out by the time you're watching this. A very dangerous move indeed, but hey, if it stops people from playing those bad actual slot machine games that are already top of the App Store charts, then that's probably a good thing. On Friday, December 19th, that excellent System Shock remake from 2023 is finally getting its Switch and Switch 2 release. And on Monday, December 22nd, Factorio is also hitting the Switch 2. If you haven't heard of this one, it's one of the GOAT automation games that came out like 5 years ago now, but it has that timeless quality to it. Came out on the original Switch a few years ago, but the Switch 2 upgrade will have high resolutions, the capacity for larger bases, and the all-important mouse mode support. This will be a free upgrade if you already own it on Switch. Definitely a good one to waste a lot of time on over the holidays. Speaking of automation, we're going to travel ahead in time now to the year 2026. We're landing on Tuesday, January 6th. This is when the early access launch of Star Rupture will take place, a first-person co-op base building, automation, and survival game with a sci-fi theme. Literally all the genres and all the things. Comes from the developers of Green Hell, which I never ended up playing, but it seems like a lot of people really liked it, so there's naturally a lot of anticipation for this one. Later that week, we've got Cozy Caravan coming out of early access. This is the cozy-looking life sim game where you're a merchant traveling from town to town, meeting with locals and selling your wares. This one comes from Australian studio 5 Lives, who made the spiritual successor to Syndicate many years back. Big shift for them this time. This comes out on PC, Switch, and iOS via Apple Arcade. Something decidedly less cozy. Friday the 9th of January is when the cult favorite plague horror / immersive sim Pathologic gets its next entry, Pathologic 3. It casts you as a doctor in town with 12 days to save it from the plague, full of characters, mysteries, time management, and consequences for your choices. It does sound pretty cool. Previous games have been characterized as difficult to get into, impenetrable even, with jankiness being a signature feature, but those who have gotten over that wall often gush about it, so I'm looking forward to seeing what those folks say about this one as well. Now, there aren't too many games releasing in the weeks ahead, but here's one that was not on our radar initially until it started picking up a little bit of word of mouth within our circles, so put this on your radar. This retro looking thing is called Angeline Era, and if you're familiar with the surreal Anodyne series of retro experiments, this is the same dev. It being a bit of a previously unknown discovery for us suits the theme of the game very well, because the whole goal is to recreate the era of early 3D video games where you didn't have the internet spoiling everything, and the act of spending time in the world and discovering secrets was the draw of playing video games in the first place. In Angeline Era, every dungeon and encounter is hidden in plain sight on an unmarked RPG world map until you discover it. The way you do it? Press a search button. Sounds simple, maybe a bit too simple, but if the chatter and user reviews are any indication, that's the thing that really helps fuel your curiosity as you poke around every single corner and weird looking thing in the world trying to try your luck to see what you find. Together with a weird combat system that has you bump into enemies to use most of your weapons, Angeline Era sounds like a lost PlayStation 1 gem on paper and in practice. This one is out right now and it still has a free demo up to let people experience its whole deal. If you like the look of this one, I've left a link to it over on our Steam curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff I've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Our feel good story for the week is actually an update to a story we covered a little while ago, a science experiment that asked the question, can rats play Doom? Back then, a team led by someone named Victor Toth was trying to train 2 rats to play Doom using a custom rig that would let them run on a ball and translate those real life movements into in-game movements. The rats' names, by the way, Carmack and Romero. Perfect. The team was successful to an extent in that the rats could run around levels, but they couldn't shoot stuff, and so Toth was, as you'd expect, unsatisfied. Well, 4 years later, Toth and his team are back with an updated rig that's pretty damn impressive. It still contains the motion tracking ball for the rats to run on, but now it has this wraparound AMOLED screen for deeper immersion for the rats, as well as a mechanism that the rats can activate with their little paws to shoot the gun. The results? Rats can indeed play Doom, both the moving part and the shooting part, so the experiment was a big success. By the way, the names of the rats they used for this round of experiments? Todd, Gabe, and Kojima. Love it. All right, ladies and gents, that's us done for the week and sort of for the year. As I mentioned at the top, this is the very last traditional This Week in Video Games for 2025, with next week's show being our annual This Year in Video Games. Always a fun one to look back on stuff and be like, wait, that happened this year? Wasn't that like 5 years ago? Many such cases. For now, please do like this video, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. Also, please do consider signing up over at thisweekinvideogames.com. I'm extremely proud of what the team are putting together over there each and every week. I think it enlarges the discussion about this art form and this industry. I think it's informative. I think it respects the intelligence of the people reading it, and I think it's a really great compliment to the stuff we do here on the show each and every week. All right, that's enough from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.